We've all felt betrayed by our education about history. At different times, maybe like you were taught some kind of simplified version of what happened. Maybe even in something personal, like, where do babies come from, and some kind of non-descript way of telling you that. But maybe it was something more ideological. Maybe you were taught that Columbus discovered America, even though there were already people in America. Or you were taught that America is a country of democracy, even though we have a republic. These sorts of realizations, this kind of frustration with your education about history, creates a unique kind of skepticism. It's not skepticism of history itself, it's skepticism of education of history. And it's not unfounded, it's not out of place, it's not a waste of time to investigate. But it does sometimes also lead to conspiracy theories about the powers that may be behind this education. Because rather than looking for forces of history, you're looking for forces of educational indoctrination. And again, this could be very relevant sometimes. It's an important part of an historical investigation to understand the development of the education of the ideology throughout history. But there's also this kind of fetishizing, figuring out some truth about the past, that it will lay bare some sort of prescription for the present, a magic way of seeing and interpreting what's happening, as a kind of code breaker to see through the things we don't understand about now. And because I'm not against that strategy, it's not that I don't think that's one way to break through that code, so to speak. But it can't be the only way. And it has to be seen as the wrong way, the incorrect way for some. Because it inherently is prescriptive. It's inherently going to require taking a certain path to arrive at a realization, which also implies having a common starting point. And a lot of the starting point can be really similar, but it's never entirely similar, and it doesn't actually have to be similar at all. We all come from very different experiences, and if our realizations of history require taking a very specific path, we would have to first start by creating a common starting point. And unfortunately, that's not really where the process of realizing things about historical education, or education of history, the realizing things about the education of history requires you to follow a certain path of thinking. This path of thinking is too prescriptive to actually be relevant to anyone. Not just that it's not relevant to a lot of people, but that in becoming a prescription, it loses its ability to function for others, which means it can serve as a valuable model. It's not useless to hear the stories of individuals investigating their personal experience of the education of history. But other people can develop historical consciousness in any number of different routes, because that historical consciousness is present in the things we do. You don't need to know that Columbus did not discover America if you're not part of the society that tells you Columbus did discover America. Your realizations of history are totally different in a personal sense. And this is really where we have to figure out ways to check our own understanding. Because it's not that someone else's understanding is more correct than yours. Simply that there is only one history. There might be subjective angles of that history, but any angle should reveal the same fundamental truths because it's the same history. So it's not someone else's path or perspective that is questioned. It's their method. Because again, it's not the investigating history, the personal history of education of history, and the history of the education of history. It's not this sort of like round and round in circles of how you got to where you are and what you finally realized. It's actually that that's the path you took to get to the same thing that was in front of you at every moment on that path. The idea that there was an end to that path was essentially just an end to fighting that realization that history is present now. That your historical education happens now. And therefore, historical education is not history. It's present. It's now. Historical understanding is not something that you can adopt from a book because it's now. It can be informed by all kinds of things. All of those things are personal experiences, but they all inform you of the same history that my experiences inform me about, and that anyone else has informed them about, because we're all in one history. Your historical situation is unique to you in the sense that you're encountering history via the objects that are in your experience. But those objects are present now, because that's when history is present now. Even a history book is present now, because that's when the education of history happens now.